Earth has places so deep that sunlight has never reached them, not once, not ever. These depths fall farther below the ocean's surface than the tallest mountains rise above it, creating a vertical world where pressure becomes a physical presence, shaping matter and limiting every known form of human survival. The ocean does not slope gently into this realm. It drops suddenly, tearing narrow trenches into Earth's crust, cold wounds where water barely circulates and time seems to slow. Here, temperatures hover just above freezing without change, and isolation stretches so far that each trench becomes its own sealed world, evolving quietly over millions of years. No light enters this zone, not moonlight, not starlight, not the faint glow from above. And yet instruments have recorded movement, chemical activity, and signs of life that persist without plants, without seasons, and with almost no food. Some organisms recovered from these depths do not resemble anything known from shallower seas, leaving scientists to wonder whether life arrived here from elsewhere or emerged under rules still not fully understood. Tonight, we will sink slowly toward those silent trenches, places where answers move carefully and the ocean keeps most of its secrets. But before we begin, if this space brings you peace, a like or subscribe helps other curious dreamers find their way here too. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? It's always lovely to see how far this quiet corner travels. So now take a deep breath, let your shoulders loosen, and together let us drift gently into the deepest darkness of the ocean. The ocean does not descend in a single smooth slope, but unfolds downward in vast layers, each one quieter, heavier, and more distant than the last. From the surface, where waves catch light and weather shapes movement, the seafloor already lies far below common imagination. Even coastal waters quickly give way to depths deeper than the tallest city skyscrapers are high. Beyond the familiar continental shelves, the seafloor drops away into broad plains that stretch for thousands of kilometers, resting deeper than many mountain ranges rise above land. This immense vertical dimension often goes unnoticed because it is hidden beneath a surface that appears flat and contained. Yet most of the planet's ocean exists in this deep, lightless expanse, occupying a volume far greater than the narrow strip of water humans most often encounter. When depth is compared to landmarks on land, its scale becomes clearer. If the highest peaks on Earth were placed upside down into the sea, their summits would still fail to break the surface in many places. Entire mountain chains could vanish beneath the water without leaving a trace above. Cities, forests, and deserts could be lowered into the ocean's depths and still leave vast distances of water above them. What seems like an endless abyss is not concentrated in one dramatic pit, but spread quietly across the planet, forming the dominant living space of Earth. The ocean's average depth exceeds the height of most landforms, meaning that shallow seas are the exception rather than the rule. The familiar world of beaches and coral reefs rests atop a hidden realm that makes up the majority of Earth's habitable volume. As depth increases, the ocean becomes less a place of horizontal travel and more a vertical descent through changing physical laws. Light thins and disappears, temperature stabilizes, and pressure steadily increases, not abruptly but relentlessly. Each layer feels subtly different, shaped by gravity pressing water upon water for kilometers. These layers stack like pages in a book written downward rather than forward, with the deepest chapters occupying more space than all others combined. The true depth of the ocean is not measured only by numbers on a chart, but by the realization that most of Earth lies beneath a ceiling of water, out of sight and largely out of reach. In understanding how deep the ocean actually is, The planet itself begins to feel taller, heavier, and far more spacious than it ever appears from shore. The boundary where the Hadal zone begins is not marked by a visible line or a sudden drop that can be seen from above. It is defined by depth alone, a quiet numerical threshold reached when the seafloor descends past about 6,000 meters. At this point, the ocean transitions from very deep to something fundamentally different. The water overhead becomes so immense that it reshapes every physical interaction below it. What lies beyond this depth is no longer simply an extension of the deep sea, but a separate realm shaped by forces that dominate all others. This boundary matters because it represents a tipping point where familiar biological strategies begin to fail. Pressure increases to levels that compress proteins, slow chemical reactions, and challenge the integrity of cell membranes. Even the simplest movements require careful balance between flexibility and stability. Materials that behave predictably above this depth begin to respond differently, bending, creeping, or dissolving in subtle ways. The physics of water itself changes character, becoming denser and less forgiving. Life that crosses into this region must already be adapted or face immediate limits on survival. Biologically, this depth marks a narrowing of possibility. Many deep sea species that thrive above cannot pass this threshold, not because of darkness or cold, but because their internal machinery cannot tolerate the weight of the ocean pressing inward. Those that do persist below have bodies shaped by selection at the molecular level. Their proteins fold differently, their membranes remain fluid under immense force, and their chemistry slows to match an environment where energy is scarce and change is rare. The Hadal boundary thus separates ecosystems not by distance, but by compatibility with pressure itself. Conditions change rapidly once this depth is crossed. The descent may appear gradual on charts, but for organisms and machines alike, the shift is abrupt. Every additional meter adds weight, and within a short vertical span, the environment becomes increasingly extreme. Trenches deepen quickly, carving narrow corridors where pressure rises faster than elsewhere in the ocean. Water movement slows, mixing diminishes, and isolation intensifies. These zones become pockets of stability, locked beneath kilometers of water, cut off from most surface influence. Crossing into the Hadal zone is less like entering a deeper cave and more like stepping into a world governed by a different set of constraints. The boundary itself is silent and invisible, yet it defines where adaptation becomes specialized and where survival depends on precise balance. Beyond this depth, the ocean no longer offers gradual adjustments. It demands total commitment to its conditions, shaping life and matter in ways that remain largely hidden, pressed quietly into the deepest contours of the planet. The Hadal zone exists only where the planet itself has been pulled apart and folded inward. These extreme depths are not spread evenly across the ocean floor, but are confined to long, narrow trenches cut deep into Earth's crust. They form where massive tectonic plates move against one another, one sliding slowly beneath the other in a process that unfolds over millions of years. As the descending plate bends downward, it drags the seafloor with it, carving a steep, elongated depression that can plunge far deeper than the surrounding ocean plains. These trenches are not sudden scars, but slow deformations, shaped by persistent motion rather than violent collapse. This geological process gives trenches a character unlike any other marine environment. Their walls are steep and uneven, rising sharply on either side and isolating the depths below from the open ocean. Sediments slide downward and accumulate, sealing the trench floor beneath layers of material delivered grain by grain over vast spans of time. Earthquakes ripple through these regions as the plates grind and lock, releasing energy that rarely disturbs the surface far above. The Hadal zone exists because only these tectonic boundaries create enough vertical space for such depths to form, making trenches rare features scattered across the globe rather than continuous expanses. The shape of trenches also shapes the life and chemistry within them. Their narrow geometry restricts water movement, limiting exchange with surrounding deep waters. Nutrients and particles sink in but escape slowly, if at all. This creates environments where isolation is reinforced not only by depth, but by physical containment. Each trench becomes its own enclosed corridor, governed by local geology and long separated from neighboring systems. Over time, the trench floor records Earth's motions in silence, preserving sediments that tell stories of shifting continents, ancient climates, and distant catastrophes that never fully reach the surface world. Trenches remain among the least explored places on Earth because their very structure resists human presence. Their steep sides challenge navigation, their depths strain materials, and their remoteness magnifies risk. Instruments must descend vertically into confined spaces, with little room for error or recovery. Signals weaken, pressure mounts, and even durable machines face limits imposed by time and stress. Each expedition requires careful planning and long intervals of preparation, often resulting in only brief glimpses before withdrawal becomes necessary. Unlike broad ocean basins, trenches do not invite repeated visits or sustained study. They demand patience measured in decades rather than seasons. As a result, vast portions of these depths remain known only through indirect measurements and scattered samples. The Hadal zone persists not because it is hidden, but because it lies within the most demanding folds of the planet, shaped by tectonic motion and guarded by the quiet difficulty of reaching it at all. Beyond the threshold where light has long since vanished, darkness becomes permanent rather than conditional. In the Hadal zone, there is no transition into night and no return to morning. The absence of light is complete and uninterrupted, stretching across generations without pause. For life that exists here, darkness is not an environmental feature but a constant state, shaping biology at its most fundamental levels. Rhythms tied to sunrise and sunset simply dissolve, leaving organisms to exist without the external cues that guide life closer to the surface. Biological clocks, so finely tuned in most ecosystems, lose their familiar meaning. Many creatures elsewhere rely on repeating cycles to regulate sleep, feeding, and reproduction. Yet here, those cycles no longer align with anything external. Instead, internal processes slow and settle into patterns dictated by chemistry and availability rather than by time of day. Metabolic activity becomes steady and restrained, conserving energy in an environment where change is rare and resources arrive unpredictably. Without seasons to signal abundance or scarcity, life learns to persist in a narrow band of stability. Reproduction follows the same quiet logic. Rather than synchronized events timed to environmental signals, it unfolds slowly and independently. Growth stretches across long spans, measured in gradual accumulation rather than rapid development. Aging, too, appears altered, with some organisms exhibiting extended lifespans relative to their size, a reflection of reduced stress and minimal external disturbance. The darkness removes urgency, allowing life to proceed at a pace shaped by endurance rather than speed. In this unchanging blackness, time itself becomes less visible. Without light or seasonal variation, there are no clear markers to separate one moment from the next. Sediments drift downward almost imperceptibly, and physical changes occur so slowly that centuries may pass without noticeable difference. For the organisms living here, Existence is defined less by sequence and more by continuity. Processes overlap and blur, creating a sense of persistence rather than progression. The environment encourages patience, not adaptation through rapid response. Darkness also alters perception. Vision becomes secondary or disappears altogether, replaced by sensitivity to chemical traces, pressure changes, and subtle vibrations. Without visual landmarks, space is sensed through contact and gradient rather than distance. Movement is deliberate, measured, and efficient. Energy is never wasted on exploration beyond necessity. Every action carries purpose, shaped by an environment that offers no visual feedback. Within this realm, time does not cease, but it stretches. It flows without emphasis, unmarked and uninterrupted. Life adjusts not by tracking time, but by existing within it, allowing darkness to smooth edges and remove divisions. In the Hadal zone, the absence of light becomes the absence of hurry, creating a world where biology unfolds quietly, suspended within the deepest stillness of the ocean. Pressure in the Hadal zone is not an abstract measurement, but a constant physical presence, pressing inward from every direction at once. It increases steadily with depth as the weight of the ocean stacks above itself, water layer upon water layer, kilometer after kilometer. At these depths, pressure is no longer something that acts occasionally or unevenly. It becomes the environment itself, shaping every interaction, every movement, every structure that exists within it. Unlike wind or current, it cannot be escaped or redirected. It is simply there, unbroken and complete. In plain terms, pressure is force spread across space, and in the Hadal zone, that force reaches levels far beyond anything encountered on land. The water does not feel heavier in a way that can be sensed individually, but its collective weight transforms behavior at the smallest scales. Gases dissolve differently, chemical reactions slow and shift. Substances that are rigid near the surface grow flexible or brittle, not from impact, but from sustained compression. Under such conditions, even familiar materials respond in unfamiliar ways. Metals used in deep sea equipment can deform subtly over time, not snapping or shattering but creeping inward as their internal structure adjusts. Glass, strong in everyday use, can fracture without warning. Plastics harden or soften depending on composition, their molecular chains compressed into new arrangements. Seals fail not because of motion, but because pressure finds the smallest weakness and patiently expands it. These changes happen quietly, often invisibly, until the system can no longer hold its form. Living tissue faces similar challenges. Cells are filled with fluid, and under intense pressure, that fluid transmits force directly to the delicate machinery within. Proteins must maintain precise shapes to function, yet pressure encourages them to fold too tightly or unravel altogether. Life that persists here relies on biochemical adaptations that resist compression, allowing essential processes to continue without collapse. These adaptations are not dramatic, but meticulous, refined over immense spans of time. Darkness often captures attention, but it is pressure that defines the true limit of this environment. Light can be removed and replaced by other senses, but pressure cannot be negotiated. It infiltrates every gap and compresses every surface. For humans, it acts faster than the body can respond, disrupting circulation, crushing air spaces, and overwhelming structural limits in moments. Machines endure longer, but even they are designed around managing pressure rather than avoiding it. In the Hadal zone, pressure dictates form and function alike. It is the quiet authority beneath the ocean, shaping matter through persistence rather than forceful impact. Everything that exists here does so because it has learned to remain intact under weight that never relents, held in place by the slow, steady pressure of the deepest water on Earth. In the Hadal zone, temperature settles into a narrow range and remains there with remarkable consistency. Near freezing water surrounds the trench floors year round, insulated by the immense depth above. Surface weather never reaches this far below, and seasonal shifts fade long before they approach the bottom. Sunlight no longer warms the water, and currents that carry heat across the upper ocean lose their strength with depth. What remains is a cold equilibrium, held in place by the sheer mass of the sea pressing down in quiet stability. This constancy shapes every biological process. In warmer waters, temperature rises and falls act like signals, accelerating metabolism, triggering growth, and synchronizing cycles of activity. Here, those signals are absent. Chemical reactions proceed slowly, constrained by cold and scarcity rather than interrupted by fluctuation. Cells operate at a measured pace, conserving energy by avoiding rapid change. Enzymes function efficiently within a narrow thermal window, and any deviation outside it becomes costly. Life adapts not by flexibility, but by precision, tuned to a world where the temperature almost never surprises. Growth reflects this stillness. Tissues form gradually, repairs occur patiently, and development stretches across long spans. Without warmth to speed reactions, organisms invest in durability over speed. Structures tend to be simple and resilient, built to endure rather than respond. Movement itself slows, not from weakness but from efficiency. In a stable, cold environment, rushing offers no advantage. Every action draws from limited energy reserves, so steadiness becomes the most reliable strategy. Reproduction follows the same pattern. Instead of bursts tied to favorable seasons, it unfolds sporadically, independent of external change. The absence of temperature variation removes urgency, allowing life histories defined by persistence rather than timing. Offspring develop slowly, often remaining within protected spaces for extended periods. The cold encourages survival through careful allocation rather than abundance, shaping lineages that endure quietly over immense time. Sudden change is rare in the Hadal zone because there are few forces capable of delivering it. Heat does not arrive quickly, and cold cannot deepen much further. Disturbances from above dissipate long before reaching these depths. Even geological activity alters temperature only minimally, its effects buffered by the surrounding water. As a result, the environment remains remarkably steady, resistant to rapid shifts that define more dynamic ecosystems. This near freezing constancy creates a world where time feels stretched and softened. Processes unfold without interruption, guided by continuity rather than variation. Life persists not by adapting to change, but by aligning perfectly with an environment that almost never changes at all. For a long time, the deepest trenches were assumed to be almost empty, shaped more by geology than by biology. Early models imagined the Hadal depths as zones where life faded out, replaced by stillness and chemistry alone. Sampling equipment was lowered more out of caution than expectation, designed to confirm absence rather than reveal presence. When the first instruments returned carrying traces of living organisms, the results felt out of place, as if they belonged to a different world than the one being measured. Initial discoveries came quietly through sediments and cameras, not through dramatic encounters. Small, soft-bodied animals appeared in footage where none were expected to exist. Microbial activity showed up in samples taken from trench floors that were thought to be nearly sterile. Chemical signatures hinted at metabolism continuing under conditions once considered incompatible with life. These findings did not arrive all at once, but accumulated slowly, each observation reinforcing the last until absence could no longer be assumed. What unsettled scientists was not merely that life was present, but that it appeared to be functioning normally within its own context. Organisms were not clinging to survival at the edge of tolerance, but seemed well adapted to their surroundings. They fed, moved, and reproduced within an environment defined by pressure and isolation. This contradicted long held assumptions that extreme depth placed a hard boundary on biological possibility. The Hadal zone was revealing itself not as a limit, but as a specialized habitat with its own internal logic. As evidence grew, so did the realization that earlier assumptions about life had been shaped too closely by surface conditions. Light, warmth, and abundant energy had long been treated as prerequisites rather than conveniences. The Hadal discoveries demonstrated that life could persist without photosynthesis, without seasonal input, and without frequent interaction with the rest of the ocean. Energy flowed downward slowly, recycling matter over long spans rather than supporting rapid growth. Survival relied on efficiency, patience, and molecular precision rather than abundance. These organisms also challenged expectations about complexity. Some were surprisingly simple in form, lacking rigid skeletons or elaborate sensory systems. Others revealed intricate biochemical adaptations that allowed them to maintain function under immense pressure. Together, they suggested that complexity could exist at different scales, expressed not always in visible structures, but in internal resilience. The Hadal zone was showing that life does not follow a single blueprint, but responds flexibly to the constraints it encounters. As assumptions shifted, the definition of habitability widened. The deep trenches became places of possibility rather than absence, reshaping how scientists thought about the resilience of living systems. What emerged from the depths was not an exception, but a reminder that life adapts quietly, often far beyond where expectation ends. Creatures living at Hadal depths often appear unfamiliar at first glance, their forms lacking the symmetry, rigidity, and definition seen in shallower seas. Bodies seem translucent, loosely structured, sometimes appearing incomplete when compared to animals shaped by reefs, currents, and light. This appearance is not a sign of weakness or primitiveness, but a reflection of the environment that shaped them. In a place ruled by pressure rather than motion, familiar shapes lose their advantage. Hard shells and heavy armor are rare in the Hadal zone because rigidity carries cost under constant compression. Materials that resist bending near the surface become liabilities when pressed from every direction. Shells crack not from impact but from stress accumulated slowly over time. Dense skeletons add mass that offers no defensive benefit where predators move slowly and encounters are infrequent. In this realm, survival depends less on protection from attack and more on structural harmony with pressure itself. Softness allows bodies to equalize internal and external pressure more easily. Flexible tissues deform without breaking, distributing force evenly rather than concentrating it along hard edges. Gelatinous forms compress gently, returning to shape without fatigue. Organs are supported by surrounding fluid, reducing the need for rigid frameworks. This design minimizes points of failure, allowing life to persist without resisting the environment it inhabits. Instead of standing firm against pressure, these creatures accommodate it. The absence of heavy armor also reflects the limited energy available at extreme depths. Building and maintaining hard structures requires significant resources, from minerals to metabolic effort. In an ecosystem defined by scarcity, efficiency becomes essential. Soft bodies demand less energy to grow and repair, allowing organisms to survive on minimal input over long spans. This economy of form aligns with a lifestyle measured in patience rather than competition. Movement in the Hadal zone further favors softness. Without strong currents or frequent encounters, rapid swimming and defensive postures hold little value. Many animals drift or crawl slowly, conserving energy while maintaining stability. Flexible bodies adapt to uneven trench floors and shifting sediments, conforming to their surroundings rather than resisting them. Sensory structures are often subtle, integrated into soft tissue instead of projecting outward where pressure could damage them. What appears fragile is, in fact, finely tuned. These creatures are shaped by constraints that reward yielding over resistance. Their forms reflect a deep compatibility with an environment that never relents. By abandoning rigidity, they achieve resilience. By simplifying structure, they endure. Over time, evolution has refined these shapes not toward familiarity, but toward balance. The Hadal zone does not favor the dramatic or the imposing. It favors forms that endure quietly, softened by pressure and shaped by the slow certainty of the deepest ocean. In the deepest trenches, energy arrives only in faint traces, filtered through distance, time, and loss. Nothing is produced locally in abundance. There are no forests of algae, no blooms driven by sunlight, no steady influx of new material. What reaches the Hadal zone has already been consumed, recycled, and diminished many times over during its descent. By the time organic matter settles into these depths, it is scarce and fragmented, carrying only a small fraction of the energy it once held near the surface. In such an environment, every calorie matters. Because energy is precious, metabolism slows. Chemical reactions proceed at a restrained pace, guided by conservation rather than speed. Cells extract as much value as possible from each molecule, minimizing waste and avoiding unnecessary expenditure. Growth becomes gradual, sometimes barely perceptible over long spans. Repair replaces replacement, and maintenance takes priority over expansion. Life persists by stretching limited resources across time rather than spending them quickly. Movement follows the same principle. Rapid motion demands fuel, and fuel is unreliable. Many hadal organisms move only when necessary, drifting, resting, or making short, deliberate adjustments to their position. Muscles are used sparingly, often for brief bursts rather than sustained activity. Stillness becomes a strategy rather than a sign of inactivity. Remaining quiet reduces energy loss and lowers the chance of wasting effort in an environment where every movement carries cost. Slow movement also reduces risk. In a place where encounters are infrequent, there is little advantage to speed or pursuit. Predation exists, but it unfolds gradually, shaped by patience rather than chase. Soft currents and stable conditions allow organisms to wait rather than react. By limiting activity, life avoids drawing attention and preserves strength for moments that matter. Survival is achieved through restraint rather than dominance. As a result, time itself seems to stretch. Life in the Hadal zone is often measured in years rather than moments. Development unfolds slowly, sometimes across decades. Reproductive cycles extend, with long intervals between successful events. Individuals may persist far longer than similar sized organisms elsewhere, their lives shaped by consistency rather than urgency. Aging proceeds quietly, without the dramatic stresses imposed by fluctuating environments. This slow pace is not a limitation, but a careful alignment with conditions. Where energy is rare, patience becomes a form of efficiency. By reducing demands, life maintains balance with its surroundings. The Hadal zone does not reward speed, strength, or abundance. It rewards endurance, control, and the ability to exist for long periods with very little change. Within this stillness, metabolism becomes a quiet agreement between organism and environment. Nothing is rushed, nothing is wasted. Life continues, not through bursts of activity, but through the steady, almost imperceptible persistence of living systems tuned to the deepest rhythms of the ocean. In the Hadal zone, food does not originate where it is consumed. There are no sunlit producers, no local blooms, no steady source of new energy rising from the seafloor. Almost everything that sustains life here begins far above, in waters that never feel this pressure or darkness. Nutrients arrive only after a long journey downward, shaped by gravity, time, and loss. What reaches the trench floor is the quiet remainder of processes that unfolded far away. Organic matter begins its descent as fragments. Dead plankton, discarded shells, dissolved compounds, and occasional remains of larger organisms drift slowly from the upper ocean. As they fall, they are intercepted again and again, consumed, broken apart, or transformed by layers of life above. Each interaction strips away energy, leaving less to continue downward. By the time material approaches Hadal depths, it has become sparse and altered, carrying only a trace of its original richness. This descent is slow. Particles can take weeks, months, or even longer to settle into the deepest trenches. Currents may suspend them, redirect them, or dissolve them entirely before they ever arrive. What finally reaches the bottom does so gently, like a thin snowfall rather than a steady rain. Large food falls are rare events, unpredictable and unevenly distributed. Most of the time, nourishment arrives as fine sediment mixed with the quiet background of the seafloor. Scarcity defines how ecosystems form under these conditions. There is rarely enough food to support dense populations or rapid growth. Life spreads thinly across the trench floor, organized around efficiency rather than abundance. Organisms are often spaced far apart, their presence subtle and easily missed. Competition exists, but it unfolds slowly, shaped by patience and careful use rather than aggressive acquisition. Because food is limited, nothing is wasted. Organic matter is recycled thoroughly, passing through microbial communities before becoming available to larger organisms. Microbes play a central role, extracting energy from compounds that appear unusable elsewhere. This microbial processing forms the foundation of Hadal food webs, quietly supporting higher levels of life through gradual transformation rather than direct consumption. The dependence on surface-derived nutrients also reinforces isolation. If material does not arrive from above, nothing replaces it locally. There are no shortcuts and no reserves waiting to be tapped. This makes the Hadal zone sensitive to even small changes in supply, though those changes may take years to be felt. Life here adapts by minimizing demand and extending survival through conservation. In the deepest trenches, food is not an expectation, but an opportunity. It arrives rarely, unevenly, and altered by its long descent. Scarcity becomes the organizing principle, shaping bodies, behaviors, and entire ecosystems around the quiet reality that everything here depends on what the distant surface is willing or able to let fall. Sound behaves differently in the deepest trenches, shaped by distance, pressure, and the absence of motion. In the Hadal zone, there are no breaking waves, no rain striking the surface, no churning storms transferring energy downward. The ocean above absorbs and scatters these vibrations long before they approach the trench floor. What remains is a muted world where sound arrives weakened, stretched thin, and often never arrives at all. The water itself becomes a vast buffer, smoothing sharp noises into low, distant murmurs that fade before they can form a presence. At extreme depths, sound travels efficiently through water, yet there is little left to carry. Biological activity is sparse, and movement is slow. There are no dense shoals, no continuous currents scraping against rock, no large predators colliding with their surroundings. Even geological noise is softened. Earthquakes echo faintly and briefly, their force diffused by layers of water and sediment. What reaches the Hadal zone is not silence in the absolute sense, but an environment where sound events are rare and separated by long stretches of stillness. In some ways, this quiet surpasses that of space. Space is often imagined as silent, yet it is filled with radiation, particles, and constant motion at invisible scales. The Hadal zone, by contrast, offers a calm shaped by insulation. The surrounding water dampens vibration and isolates the depths from most external disturbance. Silence here is not emptiness but steadiness, a lack of interruption rather than a lack of existence. This silence becomes an environmental factor, influencing how life perceives and interacts with its surroundings. Without frequent sound cues, organisms rely less on hearing or vibration detection and more on chemical gradients and subtle pressure changes. Communication, where it exists, is restrained and localized. Movement is quiet by necessity, not caution. The absence of constant noise allows even faint signals to stand out, but those signals are used sparingly. Silence also reduces unpredictability. In noisier environments, sudden sounds can signal danger or opportunity, forcing rapid response. In the Hadal zone, the lack of acoustic clutter supports a lifestyle built around patience. Changes are gradual. Events announce themselves slowly, if at all. This encourages steadiness rather than reaction, aligning with an ecosystem defined by conservation and endurance. Over long periods, silence shapes behavior and form. Structures are not reinforced against frequent impact, and sensory systems are tuned to detect minute changes rather than loud disturbances. Life integrates seamlessly into the background rather than standing apart from it. The environment does not demand alertness through constant stimulation. It allows persistence through calm. Within the deepest trenches, silence is not simply the absence of sound. It is a condition that influences perception, movement, and survival. It wraps the Hadal zone in a quiet continuity, one that supports life adapted to long intervals without interruption, living within a world where stillness itself becomes part of the habitat. Each ocean trench exists as a world set apart, separated not by distance alone, but by depth, shape, and time. Though trenches may lie within the same ocean basin, the barriers between them are immense. Ridges, plateaus, and vast stretches of shallower seafloor interrupt any direct connection. Water movement between trenches is slow and limited, filtered through layers that dilute exchange rather than encourage it. Over long spans, this separation becomes absolute, turning each trench into a biological island defined by its own conditions. Isolation begins quietly. Once life establishes itself in a trench, opportunities for migration become rare. Larvae that drift elsewhere may never survive the journey back down. Adults that move upward risk leaving the pressure range their bodies can tolerate. Even microbes, transported by sediment or water movement, face long paths shaped by chemistry and chance. What remains is a system largely closed to outside influence, receiving energy and material from above, but few new members from the side. Within this confinement, evolution follows a patient path. Small genetic differences accumulate over generations, shaped by local conditions that rarely change yet differ subtly from trench to trench. Pressure profiles vary, sediment composition shifts, and chemical environments reflect regional geology. These factors guide adaptation inward rather than outward, refining traits that fit one specific place. Over millions of years, populations that once shared common ancestors begin to diverge, their forms and functions slowly drifting apart. The result is uniqueness rather than uniformity. Species found in one trench may resemble those elsewhere only faintly, connected by deep ancestry but separated by long isolation. Similar roles are filled by organisms that evolved independently, shaped by comparable constraints but following different paths. This parallel development creates diversity that is easy to overlook, hidden beneath general labels of deep sea life. Each trench carries its own living history, written gradually through persistence rather than expansion. This divergence unfolds without urgency. There are no sudden bursts of change or rapid turnovers. Instead, adaptation proceeds through fine adjustments made over countless generations. Traits that conserve energy, tolerate pressure, or process scarce nutrients are refined incrementally. Differences emerge not through dramatic transformation, but through steady alignment with a particular environment. Over time, these differences become distinct enough to define new species, each precisely matched to its isolated home. Isolation also protects these systems from external disruption. While change arrives slowly, it arrives unevenly, allowing local life to maintain continuity across geological eras. Trench ecosystems become archives of adaptation, preserving lineages shaped by endurance rather than competition. They are not relics frozen in time, but living systems evolving quietly within narrow bounds. Across the Hadal zone, isolation is not a limitation but a shaping force. It encourages diversity through separation, creating pockets of life that reflect the subtle individuality of each trench. Over millions of years, this quiet separation has produced a deep mosaic of life forms, each adapted to a specific place carved into the planet's deepest contours. Beneath the visible floor of the trenches lies another living world, quieter and even more hidden than the waters above. Here, life does not rest on the surface of sediment, but inhabits it, filling tiny spaces between grains and layers that have accumulated over immense spans of time. This subsurface environment is compact, dark, and stable, sealed beneath pressure and insulated from most external disturbance. Within it, microbial communities persist where larger organisms cannot easily reach. These microbes do not rely on sunlight, which vanished far above the trench floor long ago. Instead, they draw energy from chemical reactions embedded within the sediment itself. Minerals carried downward from distant continents, compounds released by slowly shifting geology, and remnants of organic matter that have filtered down over centuries all become part of a subtle chemical landscape. Microbes tap into these sources with remarkable precision, extracting energy from reactions that would seem negligible elsewhere. This chemical metabolism proceeds steadily, unhurried, and continuous. Life within sediment operates at scales that defy casual observation. Cells divide slowly, sometimes taking months or years to complete a single cycle. Activity is low, but it never truly stops. Even under crushing pressure and near freezing temperature, biochemical processes continue, supported by pathways refined over geological time. These microbes alter their immediate surroundings, changing the chemistry of pore waters and influencing which compounds remain available for other life forms. Because they function without light and with minimal organic input, microbes become the foundation of Hadal ecosystems. They transform inert material into forms that can be reused, recycling what little energy reaches the depths. Larger organisms depend on these microbial processes indirectly, feeding on sediment enriched by bacterial activity or consuming organisms that do. Without this microbial layer, the deeper ecosystem would struggle to persist. The sediment itself plays an active role. As particles settle and compress, they trap gases, water, and nutrients, creating microenvironments where conditions differ subtly from one layer to the next. Microbes occupy these niches, each adapted to specific chemical balances. Over time, this creates vertical patterns of life beneath the seafloor, with different communities stacked silently below one another. Change occurs slowly, measured by the steady accumulation of sediment rather than by external events. These microbial worlds dominate not through visibility or abundance, but through influence. They regulate the flow of energy and matter, setting limits on what can survive above. Their persistence stabilizes the ecosystem, smoothing fluctuations and maintaining continuity in a place where external inputs are rare. While larger creatures may draw attention when discovered, it is these microscopic populations that sustain the deeper structure of life. Beneath the trenches, life continues unseen, embedded within the earth itself. It endures through chemistry rather than light, patience rather than movement. In the deepest reaches of the ocean, microbes quietly hold the ecosystem together, shaping a living foundation that rests beneath the seafloor and stretches through time. In the Hadal zone, communication unfolds without light, sound, or sight guiding the exchange. Darkness removes vision as a primary sense, but it does not leave life disconnected. Instead, interaction shifts inward and outward through chemistry, subtle gradients spreading through water and sediment. In this environment, information moves as molecules rather than signals that can be seen or heard, drifting slowly through still water and compacted spaces. Chemical signals become the language of the deep. Organisms release compounds into their surroundings that carry meaning only to those equipped to detect them. These signals may mark territory, indicate the presence of food, or reveal the proximity of another living body. Because movement is limited and encounters are rare, chemical messages persist longer than visual or acoustic cues ever could. They linger, diffuse gradually, and provide context over time rather than instant reaction. Sensing in this world is finely tuned. Many Hadal organisms possess receptors sensitive to minute changes in chemical concentration, allowing them to detect gradients too faint for shallow water species to notice. These receptors do not seek rapid change but consistency, enabling life to follow slow trails through water and sediment. A slight increase in a compound can signal opportunity, while its absence may indicate caution. This form of perception aligns with an environment defined by patience rather than speed. Vision, by contrast, offers little advantage. Without light, eyes become costly structures with limited function. Maintaining visual systems requires energy and resources better spent elsewhere. As a result, many Hadal organisms either lack eyes entirely or possess reduced forms that serve purposes other than sight. Where vision exists, it often detects only the faintest glimmers from bioluminescent encounters at closer ranges, rather than providing detailed images of surroundings. Chemical communication also supports reproduction and social interaction in sparse populations. Signals released into the environment can persist long enough to bridge distance, guiding organisms toward one another without direct contact. Timing matters less than alignment, allowing reproduction to occur even when individuals meet infrequently. This reduces the need for active searching, conserving energy while maintaining continuity across generations. Within sediment, chemical signals operate even more intimately. Pore waters carry messages through microscopic spaces, linking microbial communities and larger organisms alike. These exchanges regulate metabolism, coordinate activity, and stabilize the ecosystem from below. The seafloor becomes a network of quiet interactions, with chemistry flowing where sound and light cannot. Over time, reliance on chemical sensing reshapes behavior and form. Movement becomes deliberate, response is measured, and perception distributed across the body rather than focused in a single organ. Life listens to its environment by tasting it, absorbing information through contact and diffusion rather than observation. In the total darkness of the Hadal zone, communication does not vanish. It changes medium. Chemistry replaces light, persistence replaces immediacy, and connection unfolds slowly through invisible currents, guiding life through a world where sight is unnecessary and understanding moves quietly through the water itself. Reproduction in the Hadal zone unfolds within extreme separation. Individuals are scattered across vast trench floors, often separated by long distances and slow-moving water. Encounters are rare, and chance plays a larger role than pursuit. Instead of searching actively, many organisms rely on proximity shaped by currents, chemistry, and time. Life aligns itself with the environment and waits, allowing connection to arrive rather than forcing it. Chemical signals drift through still water, carrying information over longer periods than movement ever could. These signals do not demand immediate response. They persist, gradually increasing the likelihood that another organism will intersect their path. In some species, timing replaces location. Reproductive readiness lasts longer, extending the window during which an encounter can succeed. In others, stored reproductive material allows fertilization to occur long after direct contact has passed. These strategies reduce the need for frequent meetings in a world where distance is the norm. Because reproduction is uncertain, rates are low. Energy is not spent producing large numbers of offspring. Instead, resources are directed toward fewer, more resilient forms of life. Eggs are often large relative to body size, carrying enough stored energy to support long development. Young organisms grow slowly, protected by both chemistry and isolation rather than by numbers. This investment reflects an environment where survival depends on endurance rather than competition. Long lifespans support this approach. Many Hadal organisms live far longer than similar species at shallower depths. Growth unfolds gradually, maturity arrives late, and reproduction may occur only a few times across a lifetime. This slow rhythm reduces pressure to reproduce quickly or frequently. Time itself becomes a resource, allowing populations to persist despite infrequent success. Losses are absorbed over generations rather than seasons. Patience defines survival here. Instead of overwhelming predators through abundance, life relies on steadiness and continuity. Populations remain sparse but stable, balanced carefully against limited food and minimal disturbance. This balance reduces the risk of collapse caused by sudden change. Reproduction supports persistence rather than expansion, maintaining presence within narrow ecological limits. These strategies also protect the ecosystem as a whole. Low reproduction prevents rapid population swings that could exhaust scarce resources. Long lives, smooth variation, allowing communities to remain consistent across long spans. Each individual represents a significant investment shaped by time and precision rather than volume. In the deepest places, reproduction reflects the broader logic of the environment. Nothing is rushed, nothing is excessive. Life continues through careful timing, extended presence, and the quiet assurance that persistence, rather than abundance, is enough to endure beneath the weight of the deepest ocean. Life in the Hadal zone endures conditions that would unravel most biological systems, yet it does so through adaptations that seem to overturn familiar rules. At the heart of these adaptations are proteins, the working molecules of life, whose shapes determine whether chemistry proceeds or stalls. Under immense pressure, proteins elsewhere tend to collapse, folding too tightly or losing the delicate structures that allow them to function. In the deepest trenches, however, proteins have evolved forms that remain flexible and stable despite the constant weight pressing inward. These pressure-adapted proteins behave differently at the molecular level. Their structures allow subtle movement without breaking, maintaining activity even as surrounding water compresses every bond. This flexibility is not random but precise, the result of countless generations refining which shapes endure. Enzymes continue to catalyze reactions slowly and efficiently, supporting metabolism where pressure would otherwise bring chemistry to a halt. Life persists because its most basic components refuse to fail. Cell membranes reflect a similar departure from shallow water norms. In most environments, membranes balance rigidity and fluidity to control what enters and exits the cell. Under Hadal pressure, standard membranes would stiffen or leak, compromising cellular integrity. Instead, deep living organisms construct membranes from different combinations of lipids that remain fluid even when compressed. These membranes bend without tearing and seal without hardening, preserving a stable internal environment against an unstable exterior. This altered membrane chemistry also influences how cells communicate and exchange materials. Transport becomes slower and more regulated, aligned with an environment where sudden change is rare. Energy efficiency improves as membranes reduce unnecessary loss, allowing cells to survive on minimal resources. The boundary between organism and environment becomes less defensive and more cooperative, shaped to accommodate pressure rather than resist it. Together, these molecular changes reflect a broader rewriting of biology by environment. Traits that dominate surface life, speed, strength, and rapid growth, offer little advantage here. Instead, success depends on compatibility with physical forces. Evolution favors systems that yield without breaking, that operate steadily rather than intensely. The environment does not impose occasional stress but continuous constraint, guiding adaptation toward stability rather than versatility. These changes are subtle when viewed individually, yet profound in combination. They demonstrate that life does not merely tolerate extreme conditions, but integrates them into its design. Pressure becomes a shaping force as influential as temperature or chemistry, guiding which forms persist and which fade away. The result is biology that functions according to different priorities, measured by endurance rather than performance. In the Hadal zone, adaptation is not dramatic or visible at first glance. It is embedded deeply within cells, encoded in molecules that quietly refuse to fail. Through these hidden modifications, life continues where familiar rules no longer apply, shaped patiently by an environment that leaves no room for compromise. Human presence in the Hadal zone exists only through machines, carefully designed and cautiously deployed. These instruments descend slowly, carrying sensors, cameras, and sampling tools into depths no body can endure. Each descent is planned with precision, accounting for pressure, temperature, and the long silence that surrounds the trench floor. Exploration unfolds not as continuous observation, but as brief visits, moments of contact between the surface world and a place shaped to resist intrusion. Most missions rely on unmanned vehicles built to withstand crushing pressure for limited periods. Thick housings, reinforced joints, and specially engineered materials allow these machines to survive conditions that would rapidly destroy conventional equipment. Power is finite, communication is fragile, and every component must function without repair once submerged. As vehicles descend, they pass through layers of ocean that compress their structure steadily, testing seals and connections as relentlessly as the environment tests life itself. Because of these constraints, missions are brief. Batteries drain faster in the cold, electronics generate heat that must be managed, and mechanical systems fatigue under constant stress. Data collection must be efficient, prioritized, and conservative. There is little margin for exploration beyond a planned route. Vehicles touch the seafloor, collect samples or images, then begin the long ascent back to the surface. Each mission is measured in hours or days rather than sustained presence. Communication further limits exploration. Signals weaken with depth, and real-time control becomes unreliable. Operators must trust pre-programmed sequences and autonomous responses, allowing machines to make limited decisions on their own. This separation creates a quiet distance between observer and environment. What is seen is filtered through sensors, transmitted slowly, and often incomplete. Gaps in data are accepted as part of the process, rather than flaws to be corrected immediately. Technology also faces limits imposed by repetition. Each descent stresses materials in ways that are difficult to predict. Metals fatigue, seals degrade, and small imperfections grow under pressure. Some vehicles never return, lost to mechanical failure or environmental complexity. Others return altered, bearing subtle damage that must be studied and addressed before future missions. Exploration proceeds incrementally, guided by caution rather than ambition. Despite advances, much remains beyond reach. Long-term observation stations struggle to endure years under pressure. Sampling deeper within sediment risks disturbing fragile systems. Human-occupied vehicles remain rare and constrained, their visits symbolic rather than transformative. Technology adapts, but it does not dominate. The environment retains control, setting strict terms for access and duration. Through these rare machines, humanity glimpses the Hadal zone briefly, never settling, never staying. Exploration exists as a series of careful entries and necessary withdrawals. What is learned arrives slowly, shaped by limitation and restraint. The deepest ocean is not conquered by technology, but approached respectfully, revealing itself only in fragments, guarded by conditions that still resist prolonged human presence. Hadal ecosystems persist in a delicate balance, shaped by scarcity, stability, and time. Change arrives slowly in the deepest trenches, and because of that, recovery also unfolds at a measured pace. Sediments settle grain by grain, organic matter accumulates thinly, and biological activity proceeds within narrow limits. When disturbance occurs, it interrupts processes that have taken centuries to establish. Even a small alteration can echo far longer than expected, reshaping patterns that rarely experience disruption. The reason disturbance lasts so long lies in how slowly the Hadal zone renews itself. Water circulation is minimal, and material exchange with surrounding regions is limited. Once sediments are displaced or compacted differently, natural processes struggle to restore them. Microbial communities, embedded within layers of sediment, take extensive time to reestablish chemical gradients and population balance. Without rapid reproduction or abundant energy, recovery becomes an extended process rather than a return to equilibrium. Physical disturbance is particularly enduring. Tracks left by machines can persist for decades, visible long after the event that created them. Sediment clouds raised by contact may take months to resettle, altering local chemistry as particles slowly drift back into place. These changes influence which organisms can thrive, shifting community structure in ways that resist quick reversal. In an environment where stability is the norm, even brief disruption carries lasting influence. Biological recovery follows the same slow rhythm. Many Hadal species grow gradually and reproduce infrequently. Populations rebuild over generations rather than seasons. If individuals are removed or habitats altered, replacement may take longer than human observation spans. This makes the ecosystem resilient to steady conditions but vulnerable to abrupt interference. Stability protects life over long periods, but it leaves little capacity to absorb rapid change. Exploration itself carries risk because it introduces precisely the kind of disturbance the Hadal zone rarely experiences. Equipment must touch the seafloor to gather samples or images, and each contact alters the surface. Sampling removes organisms and sediments that cannot be easily replaced. Even careful operations introduce noise, pressure shifts, and mechanical interaction into a world accustomed to quiet continuity. These impacts may seem minor compared to those in more dynamic ecosystems, yet their effects persist longer due to the environment's slow pace. Understanding these risks has reshaped how exploration is approached. Scientists balance the desire for knowledge against the responsibility to preserve what remains largely untouched. Techniques evolve to minimize contact, reduce sampling, and favor observation over extraction. Progress comes cautiously, guided by the awareness that learning too aggressively could alter what is being studied. Hadal ecosystems endure through constancy, shaped by the absence of rapid change. Their fragility lies not in weakness, but in specialization. They are finely tuned to stability, making them sensitive to interruption. As exploration continues, respect for this delicate balance becomes essential, allowing the deepest environments to remain as intact as possible while knowledge grows gradually, aligned with the slow rhythm of the ocean itself. Traces of human activity have reached even the deepest ocean trenches, carried silently downward through pathways shaped by water movement and time. Far from cities, ships, and coastlines, the Hadal zone was once assumed to be insulated from surface influence. Yet evidence gathered from sediment samples and biological tissue reveals that this isolation is not complete. Materials created at the surface now rest on trench floors, woven into environments that evolved without them. Plastics arrive first as fragments. Larger debris breaks apart gradually under sunlight and wave action long before it begins its descent. These smaller pieces travel easily, suspended in currents that sweep across the ocean's upper layers. Over time, gravity draws them downward, where they join the steady rain of particles drifting toward the seafloor. Unlike organic matter, plastics do not decompose into usable nutrients. They accumulate instead, settling among sediments where change occurs slowly. Chemical pollutants follow similar routes. Compounds released into the atmosphere or waterways dissolve into the ocean, binding to particles or remaining suspended in water. Some attach to sinking organic material, hitching a ride through layers of life and chemistry. Others spread widely before eventually descending. Once they reach the Hadal zone, they persist, trapped within sediments or absorbed by organisms that have little ability to expel them. The presence of these materials within Hadal ecosystems reveals much about ocean circulation. Water does not remain confined to a single depth or region. It moves gradually but persistently, linking surface and depth through slow exchanges. Over long periods, these movements carry traces of surface activity downward, demonstrating that no part of the ocean is truly disconnected. The Hadal zone receives not only nutrients and natural particles, but also the byproducts of human systems. This discovery has reshaped understanding of the ocean as a whole. The deep sea is not an isolated sink, but part of a continuous circulation that redistributes matter across the planet. What enters the ocean at one point may eventually reach its deepest contours. The time scale is long, measured in decades or centuries, yet the connection remains steady. For organisms adapted to extreme stability, these introduced materials represent an unfamiliar presence. Plastics alter sediment structure, changing how particles settle and how microbes interact with their surroundings. Chemicals can accumulate within tissues, introducing stress into systems finely balanced by limited energy and slow processes. The effects are subtle, unfolding gradually rather than catastrophically, but their persistence means they remain embedded long after arrival. Pollution reaching the deepest trenches serves as a quiet indicator of humanity's reach. It shows that influence does not require direct contact or frequent activity. It travels through interconnected systems, guided by circulation and gravity, arriving eventually even where light, sound, and human presence never do. The Hadal zone reflects this reality without reaction, absorbing what arrives into its slow rhythms. In these depths, human traces do not announce themselves loudly. They settle quietly, revealing that the ocean functions as a single, linked body. Every layer communicates with the next, carrying both life and consequence downward through time. Along the deepest trenches, Earth quietly stores its memory. Layer by layer, sediment settles onto the trench floor, arriving slowly from distant places and distant times. Dust carried by winds, particles washed from continents, microscopic remains of marine life, and debris from natural disasters all descend and come to rest here. Once settled, they are rarely disturbed. Pressure compacts them gently, sealing each layer beneath the next, creating a vertical archive written not in words, but in minerals and grains. These sediments preserve events far older than human history. Volcanic eruptions leave thin horizons of ash, carried across oceans before sinking into the depths. Shifts in climate alter the composition of particles arriving from the surface, changing grain size, chemistry, and biological traces. Major earthquakes and landslides send sudden pulses of material cascading into trenches, marking moments of planetary movement. Over time, these signals accumulate into a continuous record, uninterrupted by erosion or reworking common in shallower environments. The Hadal zone offers conditions ideal for preservation. Slow currents and low biological activity mean sediments are not mixed or consumed rapidly. Once material settles, it remains largely intact. Oxygen levels are low, reducing chemical reactions that would otherwise break down delicate structures. Even organic remains can persist longer than expected, protected by cold and pressure. The result is a layered memory stretching back millions of years, each layer representing a quiet moment in Earth's ongoing story. Reading this record requires patience and restraint. Samples are extracted carefully, often as narrow cores that reveal stacked bands of color and texture. Scientists analyze these layers not as isolated data points, but as sequences that reveal change through time. Subtle differences in composition speak of shifting oceans, changing temperatures, and evolving life above. Chemical signatures record fluctuations in carbon cycles, while isotopes trace the movement of water and energy across the planet. Each layer holds context for the one above and below it. The silence of the trenches plays a role in this preservation. Without frequent disturbance, signals remain clear rather than blurred. Time accumulates steadily rather than being reset by constant motion. Earth's memory is not rewritten here, only added to. The trench floor becomes a place where planetary processes leave impressions without erasing what came before. This geological memory also provides perspective. It shows that change is neither sudden nor isolated. Events that seem dramatic at the surface appear as thin lines when viewed across deep time. Extinctions, climate shifts, and tectonic rearrangements all leave their mark, yet they occupy only small portions of the record. Most layers speak of continuity, of long periods defined by relative stability rather than upheaval. In the deepest ocean, Earth remembers quietly. Its history rests compressed beneath kilometers of water, waiting not to be announced, but to be carefully read. The trenches hold this memory without interpretation or emphasis, preserving the planet's past with a patience that mirrors the slow rhythm of the Hadal zone itself. Knowledge of the Hadal zone remains limited not because curiosity is lacking, but because access is constrained at every step. Exploration here demands resources, time, and equipment capable of surviving an environment that resists intrusion. Funding follows practical outcomes, and the deepest trenches offer few immediate returns. Missions yield small amounts of data after years of preparation, making them difficult to justify within systems designed to favor frequent results. As a consequence, much of the Hadal zone remains untouched not by choice, but by necessity. Technical difficulty compounds this limitation. Every component used for deep exploration must be engineered specifically for pressure, cold, and isolation. Materials that perform reliably elsewhere behave differently when compressed for long durations. Electronics must operate without failure under stress that magnifies even the smallest flaw. Recovery itself is uncertain, as ascent places additional strain on structures already fatigued by descent. Each mission becomes a singular event rather than part of a continuous presence. In comparison, space exploration appears more manageable. While space presents its own hazards, it offers consistency. Pressure is absent rather than overwhelming. Temperatures can be controlled, and movement occurs in predictable ways. Satellites remain in orbit for years, transmitting data continuously without physical degradation from contact. Repairs and upgrades can be planned, repeated, and refined. The trenches, by contrast, demand repeated descents into an environment that resets the challenge every time. Distance also plays a role. The Hadal zone lies closer to human settlements than orbiting spacecraft, yet it is harder to reach and harder to remain within. Spacecraft travel through empty regions where friction and corrosion are minimal. Deep-sea vehicles move through dense fluid that presses relentlessly on every surface. The ocean resists motion, absorbs signals, and conceals failure. Once a vehicle is lost, retrieval is rarely possible. Cost rises sharply with depth. Each additional kilometer requires thicker walls, stronger seals, and greater energy expenditure. Testing becomes more complex, and safety margins shrink. As equipment grows heavier to withstand pressure, deployment becomes more difficult. Ships must support heavier loads, crews must manage longer missions, and recovery becomes increasingly uncertain. These costs limit how often exploration can occur and how deep it can reasonably go. As a result, data accumulates slowly. Knowledge grows through fragments rather than continuous observation. Patterns are inferred rather than watched unfold. Many conclusions remain provisional, built from scattered samples and brief recordings. This scarcity shapes understanding, encouraging caution rather than certainty. The Hadal Zone remains one of the least known regions on Earth, not because it hides deliberately, but because reaching it requires patience that extends beyond typical scientific timelines. Exploration advances incrementally, constrained by economics, technology, and physical law. What is known has been earned carefully, one descent at a time, leaving much still waiting beneath the weight of the ocean. The Hadal Zone remains only partially observed, leaving wide spaces where knowledge has yet to settle. What has been learned so far suggests that the deepest trenches do not represent the end of complexity, but the beginning of unfamiliar patterns. Each descent has expanded understanding while revealing how much remains uncharted. Open scientific questions persist, not because evidence is absent, but because the environment reveals itself slowly, offering fragments rather than full views. One area of uncertainty lies in how life organizes itself across such extreme isolation. While individual trenches have shown unique communities, the connections between them remain unclear. Genetic relationships hint at long histories shaped by separation and gradual change, yet the pathways by which life initially arrived and diversified remain only partially traced. Microbial processes beneath the seafloor also raise unresolved questions about how energy cycles operate over geological timescales, quietly sustaining ecosystems without surface input. The likelihood of discovering new species remains high. Each exploration has revealed organisms adapted in ways that had not been anticipated, shaped by pressure, scarcity, and time. Many forms of life are small, fragile, or deeply embedded within sediment, making them easy to miss. Others may exist only at specific depths or within narrow chemical conditions. Because sampling is limited and uneven, vast portions of these ecosystems have never been directly examined. Discovery here is not a matter of novelty, but of presence finally being observed. New technologies promise broader glimpses, yet they also highlight the limits of prediction. Even with improved materials and autonomous systems, exploration will remain episodic rather than continuous. Observations will continue to arrive as snapshots separated by long intervals. This means patterns must be inferred cautiously, recognizing that absence of evidence does not imply evidence of absence. The Hadal Zone resists comprehensive mapping, favoring incremental understanding built from repetition and patience. Prediction becomes especially difficult in an environment defined by stability rather than fluctuation. Changes occur over long spans, making short-term trends unreliable indicators of deeper processes. Models derived from shallower ecosystems often fail when applied here, requiring new frameworks shaped by endurance rather than dynamics. Scientists must adjust expectations, allowing uncertainty to remain part of the process rather than a problem to be eliminated. Despite these limits, exploration continues to refine perspective. Each discovery reshapes assumptions about where life can exist and how it persists. The deepest trenches serve as reminders that Earth still holds domains governed by rules unfamiliar to surface experience. Understanding grows not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through steady accumulation, guided by careful observation and restraint. What lies ahead is not a complete unveiling, but a gradual sharpening of focus. The Hadal Zone will continue to reveal itself piece by piece, each finding expanding the margins of what is known. In this slow progression, discovery becomes less about predicting outcomes and more about remaining attentive to what quietly emerges from the deepest parts of the planet. Life at the Hadal depths exists where traditional definitions of habitability begin to soften and expand. Conditions here sit at the margins of what was once considered possible, shaped by pressure, cold, and isolation rather than by light or abundance. Yet, life persists, not by overcoming these constraints, but by aligning with them. The deepest trenches show that habitability is not a fixed checklist of requirements, but a relationship between organism and environment that can take many forms. In this realm, resilience is expressed through consistency rather than resistance. Hadal organisms do not fight the conditions surrounding them. They adapt inwardly, reshaping chemistry, metabolism, and structure to match forces that never relent. This approach reveals resilience as patience and precision, the ability to continue functioning within narrow limits over immense spans of time. Survival is measured not by rapid response or expansion, but by sustained compatibility with an unchanging world. The lessons offered by Hadal life reshape how extremes are understood. Pressure once defined a boundary beyond which complexity was assumed to fail. Darkness was thought to eliminate the possibility of interaction. Scarcity appeared incompatible with long-term stability. The Hadal zone quietly dissolves these assumptions. Life demonstrates that complexity can exist at molecular and chemical levels, even when external form appears minimal. Interaction can occur without light or sound. Stability can emerge from scarcity when systems are finely tuned to conserve and recycle what little is available. These insights extend beyond the ocean itself. They suggest that limits often reflect familiarity rather than reality. Many boundaries in science arise from observing life under specific conditions and projecting those observations outward. The Hadal zone reminds us that life does not conform to expectation. It adapts wherever continuity allows, reshaping its internal processes to match external constraint. What seems impossible from one perspective becomes inevitable from another. Habitability, then, becomes a spectrum rather than a threshold. Environments once categorized as hostile reveal themselves as selective instead. They do not prohibit life, but they demand particular strategies. The deepest trenches accept only those forms willing to move slowly, waste little, and endure patiently. These requirements shape ecosystems that are quiet, sparse, and remarkably persistent. Within this framework, resilience is not dramatic. It does not announce itself through abundance or speed. It exists in subtle adjustments made over generations, in molecules that refuse to unfold, in membranes that bend without breaking. It is found in long lifespans, supported by low demand, and in ecosystems that change so slowly their stability spans eras. Life at the edge of possibility does not push against boundaries, it settles into them. The Hadal zone illustrates that many limits are assumptions shaped by surface experience. Beneath the ocean's deepest waters, life continues calmly, offering a broader understanding of where and how resilience can take root. The Hadal zone offers a rare natural parallel for environments far beyond Earth, making it a quiet reference point for planetary science. In these deepest trenches, life persists without sunlight, with minimal energy, and under constant pressure. These conditions echo those expected in distant oceans hidden beneath ice or rock, places where surface warmth and light never penetrate. By studying Hadal life, scientists gain insight into how biology might function when isolated from familiar planetary conditions. On several icy worlds, evidence suggests the presence of subsurface oceans sealed beneath thick shells of ice. These oceans are shielded from radiation, darkness is permanent, and pressure increases steadily with depth. Energy, if present at all, likely arrives through chemical reactions rather than light. The Hadal zone reflects many of these constraints, offering an accessible example of how life adapts when chemistry replaces sunlight as the foundation of ecosystems. The similarities are not exact, but the underlying principles align closely enough to guide understanding. Hadal organisms demonstrate that life does not require rapid change or abundant input. Instead, it can persist through stability, efficiency, and long timescales. This has reshaped how scientists consider the potential habitability of distant worlds. Rather than searching only for environments that mirror Earth's surface, attention shifts toward places where conditions allow continuity, even if activity is slow and subtle. The Hadal zone suggests that life can remain active without announcing itself through dramatic signals. Chemical energy plays a central role in these comparisons. In the deepest trenches, microbes rely on reactions involving minerals and organic remnants rather than photosynthesis. Similar processes could occur beneath planetary ice, where water interacts with rocky interiors. These reactions provide modest but steady energy, sufficient to sustain simple ecosystems over long periods. Hadal studies show that even limited energy can support complex chemical networks when waste is minimized and processes are tightly regulated. Pressure, often viewed as a limiting factor, becomes another shared feature. Just as Hadal life adapts to constant compression, organisms in subsurface oceans would need to function under persistent force. Research into pressure adapted proteins, membranes, and metabolic pathways informs models of how extraterrestrial life might be structured. Rather than preventing life, pressure becomes one of several shaping influences that guide adaptation. Earth's extremes offer lessons not only about possibility, but about expectation. Many assumptions about life originated from surface environments where light and variation dominate. The Hadal zone reveals an alternative pattern, one defined by patience and endurance. This expands the range of conditions considered plausible elsewhere, encouraging a broader search that includes quiet, stable systems rather than only dynamic ones. By examining life at Earth's deepest margins, planetary science gains a grounded reference for imagining life beyond Earth. The Hadal zone does not promise answers, but it provides perspective. It shows that life can exist within narrow boundaries, sustained by chemistry, shaped by pressure, and carried forward by time rather than intensity. In the Hadal zone, change unfolds at a pace that reshapes how time is experienced. Evolution here does not rush forward in visible bursts. It advances gradually, shaped by forces that remain steady across eras. Pressure holds constant, temperature barely shifts, and darkness never lifts. Within this stillness, biological change becomes a slow accumulation of minor adjustments rather than dramatic transformation. Life adapts not by reacting quickly, but by aligning deeply with conditions that rarely vary. Because the environment remains stable, selection favors traits that endure rather than innovate rapidly. Small advantages compound across long spans, refined generation by generation without interruption. A slightly more efficient protein, a membrane that bends just a bit more easily, a metabolism that wastes a little less energy. These become meaningful over millions of years. Evolution stretches outward rather than forward, refining what already works instead of chasing novelty. Stability itself becomes a strategy. In ecosystems defined by scarcity and consistency, survival depends on minimizing risk. Sudden change offers little benefit and can carry high cost. Life that remains predictable in behavior and form persists more reliably than life that experiments. This encourages conservative designs, bodies, and systems that remain within narrow limits rather than pushing toward extremes. The result is evolution that polishes rather than reinvents. Speed holds little value in such a world. There is no seasonal race for resources, no rapid shifts that demand immediate response. Movement is slow because rushing expends energy without reward. Growth is gradual because rapid development offers no advantage when conditions remain the same. Reproduction follows extended cycles, timed by opportunity rather than urgency. Time itself becomes abundant, allowing life histories measured in decades rather than moments. Over immense timescales, this slow rhythm produces resilience. Species persist through geological events that erase faster moving systems elsewhere. While surface environments experience repeated disruption, the Hadal zone absorbs change gently, buffered by depth and isolation. Evolution here becomes less about survival through competition and more about survival through continuity. Lineages remain present by remaining compatible. This slow evolutionary pace also shapes diversity. Differences between species accumulate quietly, resulting from long isolation rather than rapid divergence. Subtle variations emerge, molded by local chemistry and pressure profiles. These changes rarely announce themselves through obvious form, but they matter deeply at molecular and cellular levels. Diversity expresses itself through fine detail rather than dramatic contrast. In this world, speed is unnecessary because persistence is rewarded. The Hadal zone does not favor those who arrive first or grow fastest. It favors those who remain. Life settles into a measured existence, adjusting inwardly while the external world stays largely the same. Evolution becomes a long conversation between organism and environment, spoken softly across immense time. The deepest trenches remind us that progress does not always mean acceleration. Sometimes it means remaining precisely where conditions allow life to continue, unchanged on the surface, yet quietly refined beneath. Extreme depth carries a quiet emotional weight, shaped less by danger than by unfamiliarity. Long before facts or measurements enter the mind, depth is felt as distance from the known. The surface world offers reference points, light, sound, and horizon. The Hadal zone removes each of these, gently but completely. What remains is an environment that does not respond to human presence, and that absence creates a subtle sense of unease, rooted in separation rather than threat. Depth functions as a psychological boundary because it resists intuition. Humans evolved in spaces where movement, vision, and orientation are immediate. In the trenches, scale stretches beyond these instincts. Distance is vertical rather than horizontal, extending downward through kilometers of water that cannot be seen or traversed. The mind struggles to anchor itself without visual markers or a sense of enclosure. Depth becomes less a place and more a concept, one that suggests detachment from ordinary experience. Silence deepens this effect. At the surface, sound confirms presence and activity. Even quiet environments carry background movement, wind, insects, or distant motion. In the Hadal zone, silence is persistent and layered, reinforced by water that absorbs vibration and space that offers little interaction. This stillness removes cues that signal safety or continuity. The absence of sound is not abrupt, but enduring, allowing the mind to register how little happens here over long spans. Darkness compounds the sensation. Without light, There is no edge to vision and no confirmation of scale. Darkness does not conceal something waiting, it simply extends. Human perception relies heavily on sight to interpret distance and form, and without it, the environment becomes abstract. The imagination fills gaps cautiously, not with fear, but with uncertainty. Darkness invites awareness of limitation, of how little can be sensed directly. Scale ties these elements together. The Hadal zone is vast, not only in depth, but in duration. It exists largely unchanged across human history, indifferent to time frames measured in lifetimes. This contrast introduces a quiet humility. The environment does not react, does not adjust, and does not acknowledge observation. It simply continues. That continuity can feel heavy, reminding observers how small their presence is within a much larger system. Unease arises not from hostility, but from indifference. The deepest ocean does not oppose entry, it simply does not accommodate it. There is no clear invitation or rejection. The mind interprets this neutrality as distance rather than danger. It signals a place where human expectations no longer apply, where comfort derived from familiarity has no reference. In this way, the emotional weight of extreme depth reflects a confrontation with scale, silence, and continuity. It reveals how deeply human perception depends on interaction and response. The Hadal zone offers neither. It remains still, dark, and vast, allowing unease to surface quietly, shaped by the realization that some parts of Earth exist beyond emotional context, moving forward patiently without regard for observation. The Hadal zone remains largely untouched, not because it is hidden, but because it resists presence. Depth alone creates distance, but it is the combination of pressure, isolation, and persistence that keeps this world beyond routine reach. Unlike landscapes that invite passage or settlement, the deepest trenches offer no pathway through, no surface to rest upon, no gradual transition. Entry is possible only briefly, and departure is inevitable. This makes exploration rare, careful, and limited in scale. On Earth, the idea of a frontier often carries associations of expansion and transformation. Historically, frontiers were places where human movement altered environments, reshaped ecosystems, and imposed new structures. The Hadal zone does not allow this. It cannot be occupied, modified, or claimed. It exists beneath the reach of permanence, where even the tools designed to observe it must withdraw. This resistance reshapes the meaning of frontier from a space to be crossed into one to be approached respectfully. Here, frontier means endurance rather than access. It describes a region that remains intact because it does not yield to repeated interaction. The Hadal zone does not change to accommodate exploration. It requires adaptation from those who study it, demanding restraint instead of intrusion. Each visit is temporary, leaving the environment essentially as it was before arrival. In this sense, it represents one of the few places on Earth where observation does not become occupation. Exploration without conquest defines how this realm is approached. Data replaces dominance, and understanding takes precedence over alteration. There are no routes carved, no markers left behind, no infrastructure that persists. What returns to the surface are measurements, images, and fragments of insight, while the environment itself remains undisturbed. This approach contrasts sharply with exploration on land and in shallow seas, where presence often leads to long-lasting change. The Hadal zone's untouched nature is also sustained by time. Processes here unfold slowly, and disruption lingers. This encourages caution, shaping an ethic of minimal contact. Exploration proceeds with awareness that even small disturbances may last far longer than the observers themselves. As a result, restraint becomes part of the method, and patience becomes part of the objective. In redefining what a frontier is, the Hadal zone offers a different model. It is not a boundary waiting to be crossed, but a depth that invites understanding without expectation of control. It reminds us that some parts of Earth remain beyond transformation, not because they are unknown, but because they are incompatible with permanence. Their value lies in remaining themselves. As one of the planet's final frontiers, the Hadal zone stands as a quiet counterpoint to expansion. It represents exploration as listening rather than claiming, presence without possession. In its darkness and stillness, it preserves a form of discovery that leaves no trace, allowing Earth to retain a realm that exists entirely on its own terms. That life exists in the Hadal zone quietly widens the meaning of life itself. It moves the definition away from environments shaped for ease and abundance and towards systems shaped by continuity. Here, life is not framed by comfort or visibility, it is framed by persistence. Existence becomes less about thriving in favorable conditions and more about remaining compatible with conditions that never soften. This shift broadens the boundaries of what life can be without requiring it to resemble anything familiar. In these depths, life demonstrates that complexity does not depend on richness, it depends on fit. Organisms align precisely with pressure, temperature, chemistry, and time, reducing excess until only what is necessary remains. This challenges surface-based assumptions that life requires growth, speed, or constant renewal. The Hadal zone shows that survival can take the form of careful balance, where stability replaces expansion and efficiency replaces abundance. This understanding introduces a quiet humility. The deepest trenches reveal systems that function entirely outside human preference. They do not reward curiosity, respond to disturbance, or adapt quickly to intrusion. They persist regardless of observation. Recognizing this places humanity back into a broader context, one where life has found ways to exist long before observation and will likely continue long after it fades. The Hadal zone is not indifferent out of hostility, but out of independence. Life here also reframes the idea of survival. It is not driven by competition or conquest, but by patience. Organisms endure through restraint, conserving energy, avoiding unnecessary risk, and extending lifespans rather than multiplying rapidly. Survival becomes an exercise in limitation, where success means remaining unchanged long enough to persist through deep time. This mode of existence stands apart from surface narratives that equate survival with constant struggle or dominance. The presence of life beyond comfort reveals that ease is not a prerequisite. Light, warmth, and abundance support many forms of life, but they are not universal requirements. The Hadal zone supports living systems without these elements by offering something else instead: consistency. In that consistency, organisms refine themselves inwardly, creating forms of life that are subtle, quiet, and enduring. This has implications beyond the ocean. It encourages a more inclusive understanding of life, one that accepts variability in form, pace, and appearance. It suggests that life may exist in places once dismissed simply because they did not resemble familiar environments. By removing comfort from the equation, the Hadal zone allows resilience to take center stage. Ultimately, the existence of life here invites reflection rather than explanation. It stands as evidence that nature does not organize itself around human expectation. Life continues where conditions allow continuity, regardless of whether those conditions appear welcoming. In the deepest parts of the ocean, existence unfolds without spectacle, reminding us that survival does not need approval, only time. The story of the Hadal Zone ends where it has always existed, in stillness. After layers of observation, comparison, and reflection, the deepest trenches remain much as they were before attention ever reached them. Movement slows to near absence, sound fades into a persistent hush, and change stretches thin across time. The ocean here does not perform or respond. It simply continues, holding its quiet shape beneath the weight of the world. Returning to this stillness feels less like arrival and more like withdrawal. The deeper understanding becomes, the more apparent the limits of presence feel. Knowledge can approach, measure, and briefly illuminate, but it does not remain. When instruments lift away and pressure vessels rise, the Hadal zone closes gently behind them, leaving no trace of passage. Silence resumes, unbroken and unacknowledged. As it remains now, the Hadal zone exists beyond routine influence. Its temperatures hold steady, its chemistry cycles slowly, and its living systems persist without reference to surface rhythms. No seasons reach this depth, no weather touches it. The environment maintains a steady equilibrium shaped over geological time, where disturbances dissipate gradually and continuity dominates. This stability gives the trenches a timeless quality, as though they exist slightly out of phase with the rest of the planet. Deep and dark, the Hadal zone carries its obscurity without urgency. Much remains unobserved, not because it is actively concealed, but because access remains fleeting. Vast stretches of trench floor have never been seen directly. Entire communities continue their existence unnoticed, shaped by pressures and constraints that rarely vary. Unknown here does not imply chaos or threat. It simply reflects absence of witness. The quiet of the Hadal zone is not empty. It is full of slow processes unfolding patiently. Chemical exchanges continue, organisms move with careful economy, and sediments settle into long layered records. Everything proceeds without haste. The absence of noise and motion allows time itself to feel broader, as if moments are absorbed into longer spans rather than passing individually. In this stillness, the Hadal zone serves as a reminder that not all places exist to be experienced fully. Some environments retain their significance precisely because they resist familiarity. Their value lies in remaining distant, offering perspective rather than participation. The deepest ocean does not invite resolution or closure, it offers continuity. As the narrative settles, the Hadal zone remains below, unchanged in any immediate sense. It rests in darkness, shaped by pressure and patience, carrying life quietly within its boundaries. It is still there, deep beneath the surface, largely unknown and unaltered, existing on its own terms. In the quietest place on the planet, Earth continues a conversation that requires no audience, unfolding slowly, steadily, and without interruption.